Great. Well, my name is Ross Freeman. I'm the city's project manager for the climate action plan process, and I wanted to welcome you to tonight's second community workshop on the climate action plan. I am joined tonight by a number of other collaborators that will help move this along and keep it smooth. From Cascadia, we have Addie Bash and Megan Lee, whom you'll meet shortly. And then I also have colleagues from the city staff, Allison Van Gorp and Adam Zach, who will be helping me with the breakout groups. I also wanted to welcome a number of council members that I see have joined us tonight. Looks like almost everybody, if I scroll through here. And of course, also members of the public. And we may have a few other folks who, again, as I mentioned, might be joining late. We had about 20 in advance registrations, and I see some new names that have joined tonight. So we'll be a little bit above our expected numbers. And in the back end, we have some technical support from Brent. And Brent, I'm wondering, since we do have a number of additional names here, why don't you go ahead and just allocate those individuals out sort of equally amongst the breakout groups, and we'll see if that works out.
Okay, will do.
Thank you. Okay, you can go to the next slide, please. So tonight we will have a quick welcome and introductions. I've covered some of that already. We'll go through an update of where we are in the climate action plan process. And this specifically, we wanted to touch on the greenhouse gas emissions. We have addressed this aspect at a number of council meetings over the last 3 or 4 months, but we wanted to also present the same information briefly at this meeting. Originally, this meeting had been scheduled for the summer, and so that's when that information first came out. So we still wanted to circle back with the public to walk through a little bit of that information. Also, we wanted to briefly touch on the climate action plan goals, strategies, and actions. These were, again, discussed at length through a number of different council meetings and by some individuals on Let's Talk. These were the some of the components that we had in the recent community survey. And so we wanted to touch on those again at this meeting. We'll have a little bit of time for Q&A there, and then we'll use a lot of the second half of the meeting to break out into breakout rooms. And you'll have a facilitator there who will walk us through the questions that we're trying to gather input on tonight. We will return to the main group and then kind of wrap up with the next steps and then adjourn. You can go to the next slide. So I've already mentioned some of the faces here. It's myself on the left, joined by Adam and Allison, and Addie and Megan on the right there. And you'll be seeing a number of us in the breakout sessions a little bit later. Next slide, please. Again, if you do have tech support questions tonight, we have all sorts of ways for you to reach Brent. The chat, if you haven't used Zoom much, the bottom of the screen, there is an option to communicate with individuals or the whole group. You can also always pick a participant, or sorry, you can pick the chat button and correspond with him that way. You can call him. You can also email him, whatever works if you need support. Next slide. So just to recap real quick, the way that we like to conduct these kinds of online meetings where it's more of a workshop format. There aren't right or wrong answers here. We're interested in people's honest, candid opinions and ideas that we haven't heard before. In the breakout rooms in particular, we'll be wanting to have just one person speak at a time so that we can hear everybody. And of course, we are interested in what your thoughts are, not what you think others might want to hear. And it's okay to disagree in the breakout room, but please be respectful of others' opinions. And the setting that we have structured tonight, it's less of a debate in the breakout room, and really we're just gathering input from each of you. And because we don't have as much time as we'd ideally like, we won't have a lengthy opportunity for back and forth discussion. but we'll do everything we can to capture all the information. Next slide. So we just have a quick introduction and icebreaker here. And if you would like to go ahead and rename yourself with your first name, if you have preferred pronouns or an affiliation or a group you represent, anything else you'd like to add to that, you can. And this is done by clicking on the participants button, and then you hover over your name and you can click more to rename yourself. If some individuals might, for example, have joined with a phone number or with someone else's computer or some other situation where you'd like to clarify who you are, this is a great opportunity for you to do that. And once you have done that, in the Zoom chat, there's again that chat button at the bottom of the screen. In the Zoom chat, if you'd like to just go ahead and answer what your favorite thing is about living on Mercer Island or just Mercer Island in general, we can do that now. And Megan has pasted that into the chat to help you remember that question. I'll just take a minute or two if you'd like to fill that out. All right, we're starting to see some answers come in here. Small town feel, the lake, of course, central to everything, other communities nearby. Small town feel, open space schools, convenient to other communities. I'll give it just a few more seconds here. Caring and involved people. All right, looks like we're leveling out. So thank you for that. And again, it looks like we have most people have identified who they are, and that helps us figure out where to put you in the breakout rooms. And with that, we'll go ahead and finish that icebreaker. And we can advance to the next slide now. At this point, I'll be handing off to one of my colleagues, Megan Lee, with Cascadia Consulting, and she will lead us through the next few slides, giving the update on the climate action plan, sort of inner workings. Thank you.
Great. Thank you, Ross. So as Ross mentioned, my name is Megan Lee. I'm from Cascadia Consulting Group, and I'm going to quickly go over what a climate action plan is and then some updates to date. So to begin, what is a climate action plan? Broadly speaking, a climate action plan, or as we reference, a CAP, is a roadmap of local policies to reduce our greenhouse gas emissions, enhance environmental sustainability, and prepare for climate change. I also like to think of a CAP as a blueprint for how the city will reach their climate goals and carbon neutrality date. So we started the CAP development process way back in winter of 2022, where we conducted a baseline analysis of existing city plans, other regional climate action efforts, and a greenhouse gas inventory and forecast. Then we focused on developing the real framework of the plan, including the emissions reduction targets we want to reach, and then the strategies also to help us get there. We also performed a qualitative analysis known as a multi-criteria analysis, or an MCA, which we will talk about later in the breakout rooms, to refine our action list. Currently, we're in the process of drafting the actual plan, which involves gathering feedback from the community, city staff, and city council on the plan, and then finalizing the MCA criteria to help prioritize the actions. Then in the spring of 2023, we will use the feedback from the community and the city to finalize the plan and adopt. Throughout the entire CAP development process, we've been engaging both city staff and community members through meetings and workshops like this one, as well as a survey, which I'll talk about next, and other engagement efforts. The goals of these engagement efforts is to ensure that we develop a plan that fits Mercer Island specifically, and ensure that it aligns with your community priorities and has the best chance of being supported by your residents. Great. Oh, and there's a little "you are here" sign. All right, so here's a detailed look at our engagement timeline. I won't go too much into detail here, but throughout the process, like I mentioned earlier, we've engaged with both the public, which you can see in the light blue, and then with city council and committee members, which is in dark blue. And hopefully this just provides a visual representation of our engagement efforts. We're currently at the end of phase 1 and entering phase 2 shortly. So back to the survey that I mentioned briefly, we recently closed a survey that was sent to 2,500 randomly selected residents who were given the option to complete the survey online or submit it via mail. We tracked responses from the sample size through a unique code that was printed on the envelopes, which residents filled out both on the online and printed survey. The online version was also available and open to the general public, so we gathered and analyzed those responses as well. The first part of the survey asked about climate action priorities. So for example, what the greatest climate threats are to the island, what residents perceive as the best solutions, et cetera. And then the second part was really focused on gathering input on draft cap strategies. So some high-level findings from the survey. Across climate strategy categories, the majority of survey respondents across both the statistically significant and the general public surveys strongly or somewhat supported the proposed strategies. And that's across the board. Respondents across both surveys ranked worsening air quality as the most important climate-related threat. Respondents indicated that financial incentives were the most supported type of climate action. And this is pretty common across other jurisdictions that we work with as well. And respondents most supported resiliency, renewable energy, and waste reduction strategies, and showed a little bit lower support for water conservation, outreach, and education strategies. I'll now hand it off to Addie to walk us through Mercer Island's greenhouse gas emissions inventory.
Yeah, thank you. I see some questions coming in through the chat, and we have a Q&A planned at the end of the presentation, so we'll get to those then. So this slide here presents an overview of Mercer Island's community emissions. The donut chart on the left shows the 2019 community emissions profile. I'll clarify that we're using 2019 as the representative emissions year instead of 2020 because COVID had such a large impact on our activities. So it's not really representative of Mercer Island's typical emissions. So you can see on this graph that the largest sources of community-wide emissions are typically on-road passenger vehicles and building electricity. Both are at around 30%, followed by building natural gas and passenger air travel. This shows us that electricity, natural gas, and transportation actions will have the highest impact on reducing overall emissions. So the chart here on the right shows emissions trends over time. So emissions from 2007 through 2020 are based on completed greenhouse gas inventories. And then the emissions totals here for 2030 through 2050 represent how emissions are forecast to increase over time, assuming no action is taken to reduce emissions. And we refer to this forecast as the business as usual forecast. So in this graph, you can see that emissions are expected to increase steadily through 2050, and that building electricity, which is that dark blue, and on-road vehicles, the lightest blue, continue to be the largest emission sources, followed by passenger air travel and natural gas. So in the CAP, we've set a target to reduce forecasted emissions by 50% by 2030, 75% by 2040, and 95% by 2050. And that reduction is compared to a 2007 baseline level. So I'm going to go into a little bit more detail about how we will achieve these targets in the next few slides. So this slide here zooms into 2030 and breaks down the emissions reduction target. So as shown in the previous slide, emissions are expected to increase if no action is taken, and they're expected to increase to around 414,000 metric tons of CO2e. So to reach our target of reducing 2007 level emissions by 50%, we will need to get to about 166,000 metric tons in 2030. So some of the reduction that we will need will come from state and federal climate policy, requiring that energy gets cleaner, buildings become more efficient, that more EVs are put on the road, etc. These policies are expected to reduce emissions by around 200,000 metric tons, leaving about 38,000 metric tons of emissions remaining that we must reduce through local climate action. So these are the initiatives that we have planned for the CAP. Next slide. So now scaling back out, this graph, which we call a wedge graph, depicts the full picture for meeting our emissions reduction targets in 2030, 2040, and 2050. So the forecasted emissions are depicted here with that red line at the top. Then the gray slices show the emissions reduced through those state and federal policies, as well as other external policies and initiatives. The blue slices then show the emissions reduction that we will be reduced through local climate action. So now we've shown what emissions reduction we need to achieve with the CAP. So now we want to walk through a little bit more about how the CAP will actually achieve these targets. So first, we want to define some of the key terms that we'll be using today and in the plan. And this is all in your discussion guide as well. So first, the CAP vision is the overarching vision that outlines what we hope the CAP will accomplish, the desired future that we hope to reach for Mercer Island and its residents. The overarching greenhouse gas emissions reduction targets, those are the specific emissions targets that I just presented in the previous slide. So to reiterate, these targets are what we aim to meet through the collective actions in the CAP. So Mercer Island's CAP will be broken into 5 to 6 focus areas: cross-cutting and municipal, buildings and energy, transportation, natural systems, consumption and disposal, and community resilience and well-being. So goals are the vision, or what we hope to accomplish within each focus area, the desired progress that we hope to make. Targets are the specific measurable goals that we are working towards in a given focus area, the quantifiable goals that we will need to achieve our emissions reduction target, as well as achieve other goals in the CAP. Metrics are the indicators that we will use to measure progress in reaching our established goals. Strategies speak to the how, the pathways that we will take to reach our goals and targets. And finally, actions are the specific initiatives or steps that we will take to enact a given strategy. Next slide. So I also want to clarify that the CAP is focused on reducing emissions, but that's not its only focus. It also focuses on preparing Mercer Island for the impacts of climate change. So this means that we'll have a mix of both mitigation and adaptation actions. Mitigation actions address the cause of climate change and aim to prevent climate change through reduction in greenhouse gas emissions and by increasing carbon sinks that store these gases. Adaptation actions address the impacts of climate change and aim to manage the impacts by protecting vulnerable social and biological systems. So we prefer not to say really that one type of action is more important than the other. We aim to get a mix of both, and we aim to have actions that support both goals as much as possible. So the last time I promised that I'll reiterate these targets, but to reiterate, our overarching greenhouse gas emissions reduction targets are a 50% reduction below 2007 levels by 2030, 75% by 2040, and 95% by 2050. I'll clarify that these targets are aligned with the K4C targets, of which Mercer Island's been a member since the founding of the partnership. Next slide. So from here, I'm going to quickly introduce each of the focus areas. I know we don't have a lot of time, so I'm not going to go into too much detail on each one, but there is much more detail in your discussion guide, so I encourage you to reference that throughout the meeting today. So our first focus area is cross-cutting and municipal. The goal in this focus area is to reduce community and municipal greenhouse gas emissions by encouraging community members to participate in local climate action and leading by example in reducing emissions from municipal operations. So this is an important focus area because education and engagement is a community priority. Taking action at the city level reinforces the importance of local climate action, the idea that the city can lead by example. Because this focus area is designed to sort of be all-encompassing, the targets actually align with our overarching emissions reduction targets. The strategies in this focus area include engage and support community climate action, reduce climate impacts of municipal operations, and institutionalize climate considerations into city planning and decision-making. And I'm not going to go into each specific action, but we do have the full action descriptions in your discussion guide. Next slide. So next we have buildings and energy. The goal within this focus area is to reduce greenhouse gas emissions from buildings by reducing energy use, electrifying buildings, and transitioning to clean and reliable renewable energy sources. So this is a really important focus area because commercial and residential energy accounts for around 45% of the community's total emissions. So targets within this focus area include a 78% reduction in building greenhouse gas emissions by 2030, 35% reduction in building natural gas, propane, and fuel consumption by 2030, and a 22% reduction in community-wide energy use by 2030. And by 2050, we're aiming for a 97% reduction in building greenhouse gas emissions, a 92% reduction in building natural gas, propane, and fuel oil consumption, and a 63% reduction in community-wide energy use. The strategies in this focus area include transition to non-fossil fuel building energy and reduce energy use in new and existing buildings. So transportation, our goal is to reduce greenhouse gas emissions from transportation by transitioning to electric vehicles, expanding multimodal transportation options, and improving cycling and pedestrian networks. So it's important because transportation accounts for more than half of Mercer Island's greenhouse gas emissions. Our targets in this focus area for 2030, a 65% reduction, or the 65% of new passenger vehicles and 20% of all vehicles are EVs or electric vehicles. A 1% reduction in overall vehicle miles traveled. So meaning that the number of miles traveled in single occupancy vehicles is reduced by 1%. A 44% reduction in average vehicle carbon intensity, a 5% reduction in air travel fuel usage, and a 10% reduction in air travel fuel carbon intensity. And I'll clarify with those last two targets that the air travel targets are really meant to be region-wide. So the actions within those aimed towards achieving those targets are really focused on regional collaboration to promote more sustainable aviation fuel and promote alternative travel modes. It's not intended as a targeted way to change individual residents within Mercer Island's flying habits. It's really a regional wide approach. So 2050, those targets are 100% of all passenger vehicles are electric vehicles, a 5% reduction in overall vehicle miles traveled, a 96% reduction in average vehicle carbon intensity, and a 1.5% reduction in air fuel use, 95% reduction in air fuel carbon intensity. Next slide. Natural systems, our goal is to foster climate resilient natural landscapes by protecting vital habitats, ecosystems, and natural resources, and conserving water resources. This is a particularly important focus area because natural systems store and capture, in other words, sequester carbon from the atmosphere. And they also provide important climate resiliency services like providing shade, which has a cooling effect during heat waves. Our targets in this focus area for 2030 are a 50% increase in the city's tree canopy. And this is compared to a 2018 baseline because 2018 was the last year of the most recent tree canopy study, and a 70% increase in the tree canopy by 2050. Strategies in this focus area include increase urban tree canopy and green space and foster healthy and resilient natural systems. Consumption disposal, our goal is to reduce community waste and the greenhouse gas emissions associated with the consumption and disposal of goods and materials. Food waste produces potent methane. Community waste generation has other environmental impacts, including contributing to plastic pollution. So there's some of the key reasons why this is an important focus area. Targets here are an 81% reduction in solid waste greenhouse gas emissions by 2030, a 70% waste diversion from landfills, and zero waste of edible food, 11% reduction in landfill waste, 85% increase in diversion of construction and demolition waste, no net increase in total community-wide waste generation, including solid waste, recycling, and compost. In 2050, these targets increase to an 86% reduction in solid waste greenhouse gas emissions, a 60% reduction in landfill waste, and a 10% reduction in total community-wide waste generation. Strategies to achieve these targets include reduce waste generation and landfill disposal and consume sustainably. So our last focus area, community resilience and well-being. The goal here is to ensure that all Mercer Island residents are prepared for current and future climate impacts. This is an important focus area because we already are facing climate-related threats, including extreme heat and poor air quality from regional wildfires. And these threats disproportionately impact vulnerable communities and put our safety and health at risk. So for this focus area, we actually don't have a target yet. Unlike some of the other focus areas, community resilience can be a little bit harder to measure, and it's very specific to the individual community. So that's one of our focuses for tonight, is to get your feedback on what some of your priorities are related to community resilience, and that'll be used to inform the target in the plan. Some strategies that we have identified for community resilience include increase community resilience to climate impacts and prepare infrastructure and services for climate change. So I know that was a lot to go through, so thank you for bearing with us. We're going to open it up to a Q&A before we go over our discussion plan for tonight. And please feel free to submit comments either over the Zoom chat or just go ahead and unmute yourself and ask your question.
I did have a small question. So I like a lot of the proposals we had around, I guess, related to transit and electrifying the vehicle fleet, but I didn't see anything related to, I guess, that like the overall reduction in transit didn't seem to be very aggressive. I think it said like a 10% reduction in vehicle miles traveled or 5%. I'm wondering if there's anything in the plan related to like modifying development to allow like more commercial centers, for example, to meet those goals, or I guess why those weren't really considered is what I'm asking.
We do have some development kind of related actions focused on transit-oriented development and.
Okay, cool. Then I guess I just missed out on that.
Yeah, that's it's one of the TR 2.5.
Oh, cool. Yeah, I'd love to see a transportation demand management plan.
But one of our focuses for tonight is inviting some new action ideas. So we'd love to hear more of that when we get to our discussion, if you have additional ideas kind of related to development opportunities.
Cool, thanks.
Yeah.
Addie, it looks like we have one in the chat too.
Oh, great.
And I can read it off. It said, would community resilience include the infrastructure to ensure electrical grid and distribution?
Yeah, that we don't currently have actions focused specifically on the electric grid resilience. But we do have a strategy focused on preparing infrastructure. And a vulnerability assessment planned to kind of address what some of those vulnerabilities are, which grid resilience might be come to light as a primary vulnerability for Mercer Island. But that's definitely a type of action that we could consider and have integrated for other communities. Yeah, Mike, go ahead.
Thanks, Eddie. I thought Ross did a good job at the last presentation, Cap 1, of acknowledging that everything's going to be tempered a bit by the reality of expense. Where and when, I didn't see any in your presentation, a balance of what our aspirations are versus what the island can afford, what is practical.
Yeah, that's actually what we'll get a little bit more into that in the discussion. Ross, feel free to jump in if you have other things to add, but our analysis of cost so far it's been integrated into this multi-criteria analysis that we have completed the first round of, but that's one of the discussions for tonight. And we take a approach of identifying actions as, you know, high, medium, or low cost, and then that's integrated as part of our considerations for how actions are prioritized. And we did do this cost analysis pretty early on in the action development process, and it was used by the sustainability committee from the city council to kind of help inform their initial review of the actions. Initial review and kind of refinement of the actions.
Yeah, I'll just tack on to that, Addie, that in addition, we'll dive into that a bit more deeply using that information and other components to map out an implementation plan. So pretty much every contemporary climate action plan has a section at the end that shows how each action could be implemented, the time frame, the relative cost, the staffing, other considerations, partner agencies. And so in there, we'll have a more refined assessment of relative cost of different actions. And so that is also work that is underway now.
Yeah, we see question from Carolyn, but do you want to just voice it instead, or you want me to read it from the chat?
I didn't hear what you said. What?
Oh, I saw did you have a question in the chat? I can read it, or if you want to go ahead and just ask it verbally.
Sure, I'll go ahead and just ask it. Does any strategy focus on heat island effect in neighborhoods and in the town center where there's a lot of pavement absorbing heat and making it too hot for walks during the day and making our nights too warm? I'm thinking in terms of, I was very happy to see the proposed increase in tree canopy. That's great. I'm wondering about, however, targeted tree canopy that gets to where people are living and are feeling too hot. I also reference a 2018 tree canopy study that Mercer Island completed. It contains a phrase, right away in Mercer Island are prime areas for increasing tree canopy to the benefit of the community. So I'm wondering about that.
Yeah, thank you. We don't have, I was going to say that the tree canopy strategy kind of, it gets at this heat island effect. But the focused tree canopy on those areas identified in the tree canopy plan, we could make that more explicit.
Thank you.
Yeah, I'm making sure we noted that.
Thank you.
Yeah, Councilmember Reynolds.
Yes, can you just confirm my understanding that the emission target reductions are all dependent on PSE complying with the CETA requirements for greening up their own energy supply? And to the extent that that's true, and I think it is, will our plan, or if any neighboring communities' plans included some contingency plans if the utilities don't deliver, if they're unable or unwilling, or the law changes to comply with greening up their own energy supply?
Yeah, thank you. So yes, that is one of these state policies that was assumed would be in compliance in order to measure that impact from state and federal policies. So yes, in our modeling, we did assume that that utility companies would comply with SATA. We have, for other communities, done sort of alternative analyses of what happens if SATA's not in compliance. Our current wedge does not is not set up that way, but that might be something that we could explore. It's kind of hard. It's sort of a guessing game at this point about whether or not the compliance, whether or not they'll be in full compliance, but it is really sort of best practice with modeling at this point to assume that they will comply with SATA and that those emissions reductions will be achieved. But it's a really good point because it is a big portion of the wedge and a big amount of emissions reduction that we're assuming will happen.
And I'll chime in there too, that it's also true that significant federal actions we are also assuming will happen as currently stated. Sometimes that does not play out, but again, this is a model into the future and we're using the best information we can given what we know today. There was one other question in the chat from Callie about resilience that's somewhat related to this and to PSE. And then I think Councilmember Anderl had her hand up, and we can go to her next. Callie asked just about whether community resilience would include the infrastructure to ensure, that the grid is intact and the distribution capacity is maintained. And I guess I would say yes, it certainly could. We could make that one of the resilience criteria that we look at, in addition to many other things. So I think that's a good suggestion. And as we know, the resilience of the electrical distribution infrastructure on the island gets challenged a lot by windstorms. So that's something that the community is fairly sensitive to and more aware of than perhaps other places where wind is not such a significant effect with blown down trees. I think that's a good one to put in the mix. And I think, let me just check. I think, yes, Councilmember Anderl, and then we can go back to Carolyn and one other question in the chat.
Yeah, thanks. I think I'm about to kind of ask John's question in the chat, but I was here first. The question that I had though specifically was like how much of these reductions are premised on carbon sequestration versus actual reduction, and or carbon offsets or carbon credits versus we'll just drive 5,000 miles less per year.
Yeah. So okay. Yeah. Currently, our targets do not include offsets or renewable energy credits, or our actions do not focus on those. So these are direct reductions in direct emissions.
Okay. I do have another question when it's my turn. Again.
Do you want to touch on the Green Direct program at all, Ross? Was that?
Well, I was going to say, just to summarize what you said, so we are not counting on a specific number of offsets to be purchased or, for PSE to ramp up that program and do more with it or anything else that has a high degree of sort of uncertainty. That's not built in there. What is, though, built in is that the city itself does fund, or I should say has and is funding the construction and now operation of a wind farm in central Washington. And that is considered a more direct connection to green power than what an individual resident can achieve. And the best practices today are that that does, because we paid to get the equivalent of all of the city's electrical power through wind, the city itself, municipal operations, does not have electricity related emissions now. So those have been zeroed out. Now, of course, the city's emissions in totality for everything we do are only 1% of the community's emissions. So there's still lots of work to do in the other side of the equation, but I just wanted to point that out. We probably have time for 1 or 2 more questions, Addie. And let's see where we are in the chat.
I see. Carolyn, you also have your hand raised.
Yeah, I don't know if there might be other people who asked questions before me. I see some things in the chat there, but
So, okay, we have a question from
Yeah.
Peter. There is a lot in the chat.
yeah,
So Peter, would expansion of solar panels, especially in residential areas, impact the tree canopy? There is definitely a connection between both because, trees cover solar panels. So that is something that we could consider as part of our implementation considerations for actions related to both of those. That's a good point, Peter. I think we're at your question, Carolyn, if you want to.
okay. How do we have a strategy that gets at building materials that use less energy in their manufacture and transport and which embody carbon in use? And I wondered, is the State Building Code Council working on that, or the Regional Code Collaborative?
So
How do we get at that?
We do have some actions within the consumption and disposal consume sustainably strategy focused on low carbon building materials.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
Great. Thank you.
John, I think we got your question. Suzanne, we'll take this feedback into consideration as we're going to save the chat and everything. It'll be integrated into our workshop summary. So yeah, I think we have maybe time for one more if there's one other question. Okay, if not, we are right on time to continue on. So thank you all for all those questions. There's plenty more to discuss in your discussions. So keep those thoughts. Megan, if you want to go ahead and share your screen again. So in a few minutes, we're going to break into smaller breakout room discussions. We have 2 discussions planned. One is focused on getting any additional ideas you have for actions. So we heard a lot already, but want to invite some more ideas for any other additional ideas for actions that we may have missed. And then another discussion focused on getting your feedback on how we prioritize actions in the plan, as well as your priorities around community resilience. So before we move to the breakouts, I just want to quickly provide a little bit of context around the discussion around prioritizing actions. So we talked a little bit about this, but this discussion will focus on the criteria that we will use in our multi-criteria analysis, which is our system for ranking actions based on different criterion, including cost, which we talked about. So the goal of the MCA is to determine how to prioritize actions for early implementation with the understanding that we can't do everything at once. We're going to have to identify which actions take priority over others. And we've already started this process and we've ranked the 58 actions that we've identified to date so far in the plan. And we'll go through the criteria that we used in the next slide. So the criteria we've used so far are cost, what resources will be required for the city, residents, and or businesses to implement the action. Impact, how much will the action move the needle on reducing emissions or building climate resiliency? Synergies, how will this action align with or support other city planning efforts? Feasibility, how feasible is the action to implement? taking into account community support and potential political, technical, and regulatory barriers. Co-benefits. Does the action enhance equity and or address multiple goals or priorities beyond emissions reductions or community resilience? And finally, community support. What ranking did this action receive in the statistically significant community survey? And that's the same survey that Megan did an overview of at the beginning of the presentation. So with that, oh, Lisa, go ahead. Do you have a question?
Yeah, quick question. Can you just go back to that slide?
Yep.
Sorry, just when you changed your screen. So you're going to link items 1 and 2 though, right? I mean, so it's going to be a cost benefit analysis, not just what's it going to cost and how much is it going to move the needle. Things will be prioritized by least cost, most effective.
Yeah, that's a good question. So all of these are considered as part of it, and they're given different weights. So you know, if the city has determined that cost is more important than the impact, then the scoring of that cost will have a slightly higher percentage impact on the overall final score that the action receives at the end. But yeah, we are weighing all of these different criteria. Does that answer your question?
Kind of. Maybe I can kind of take it maybe offline with Ross in terms of how that linkage is and analysis is going to be conducted.
Sure, I'm happy to talk with you more about that after.
Sure, thanks.
Yeah, and so one of our discussions tonight will be focused on identifying if there's additional criteria here that we missed that we should consider. So any other questions about our discussion plan for tonight? And if not, we can go ahead and transition to our breakout rooms. Okay. So hearing none, I think we can go ahead and transition. We are just sticking right on time. This is great. So Brent, are you good to transition us?
I am.
Okay.
I'll be in the main room if anybody has any issues. Here you go.
Thank you.
Oops, I think David was in the middle of a thought in our breakout room and we all got.
He
I was
gonna
was.
say, I
I
don't
think
know
a
about
few
you
of us
guys, but
were.
we were having a robust discussion and then we were abruptly thrown out of the room.
These always go so fast. We're gonna have other ways for you all to share feedback, and we'll follow up in an email and additional ways for you all to email and send additional thoughts if you didn't get to them in the breakout rooms, because I know they always do feel like they go really fast. So I'm gonna go ahead and share my screen with kind of a last slide. All right. Is everyone seeing that okay? Sorry to. Okay. Is that looking all right?
Yep.
All right, great. So thank you all. As we just were talking about, the conversation went really fast. There was a lot to get through. So there's definitely other ways that you can add feedback. In the near term, we invite you to send additional feedback and ideas to Ross at sustainability@mercerisland.gov. Moving forward, we're currently in the process of drafting the first drafts of the CAP in preparation for the public comment period for the plan for the beginning of next year. And during that period, the community will have full access to the draft plan online. You'll have opportunities to actually submit direct feedback about the plan that reviewed, also digitally provided online. From there, we will edit the plan based on community feedback. And then we have several meetings planned with city council in the first quarter of next year to get the final plan approved and adopted. So we have a couple demographic polls to wrap up tonight, just to get a sense of kind of who we all had here in the room with us. So Brent, do you have access to those polls?
I do. Here we go.
Great. We'll leave it open. Ross, I don't know if you had any other kind of last minute comments to close this out for tonight.
No, I think that is where we wanted to leave it. And in the interest of time and being right on schedule, that is great. I will say that, yes, our breakout room, we ran out of time just like everybody else. But we have a number of different ways for you to continue to send your thoughts. As Addie mentioned, sustainability at mercerisland.gov is the overall address to use. The Let's Talk engagement site, many of you already know about this, but that is the place where you can ask a question or just post a comment, and where you can find most of the background materials we used in council meetings, at community meetings, and other results such as the draft survey report, the draft public engagement plan, these kinds of items. Of course, you can always send something just to general city addresses or to your preferred council member for that matter. And all of that information will get back to us. And as Addie mentioned, we're in the phase now of pulling together a lot of different sources of information and research to come out with that draft document. And then that will be up for your digestion and response for about a month. So people will have time after the holidays to really dig into that and see what's in there that resonates with you.
Also, Ross, they can write to council@mercerisland.gov to get the entire council.
Yes, if you ever would like to do that to reach the whole council, that's the way to do it. Let's see, I think with that, that's all I have, Addie. If you have any other thoughts, we will be sending an email out to all of our attendees here. So we'll reiterate some of the items that we mentioned here for ways to contact us. We can also send out the slides that we used tonight. And as usual, we will post the material as well on our Let's Talk site. We will also be posting the archive video of the meeting to our YouTube channel, just like we do for our other council meetings, boards, and commissions and such. Anything else, Addie?
Thanks, Ross, for
Thank you.
and to Cascadia for coordinating all of this. I think this was nicely done tonight, so kudos.
Thank you all for participating.
Yes,
Yeah.
thank you for joining, everyone, and we appreciate having most of council here too.